Christians and life after death, or if you want to put it, want me to put it more pompously, Christians and posthumous existence. Vanakkam, welcome, namaskaram, good morning. Every religion has some intuition about what happens to human beings after they die. In fact, one of the factors that distinguish the human inclination to be religious, or the motive behind individuals becoming religious, is the anticipation of immortality. That is to say, the assurance on whatever grounds that there is life beyond death, that death is not the final termination, that it is the inauguration of another life. Death is also like birth, a new beginning. And in fact, the philosophical argument I can adduce here is that if we imagine a life to be like a circle, circle being the symbol that's most perfect of all geometrical shapes, circle is supposed to be the most perfect. Now, if you begin on any point on the circumference of a circle, that point is both the beginning and the end. So, in anything that is perfect, the beginning is also the end, and the end is also the beginning. But let me not take you too much along the philosophical lines. Let's stay very practical, down to earth. I just mentioned this much to indicate that there are other dimensions to it, but that's not going to be my present line of inquiry. I want to begin by identifying a huge contradiction that exists in the outlook of Christians to life after death. On the one hand, Christians as believers would pretend or persuade themselves and want to persuade others to believe they are leading a life that is singularly focused on the world to come, reigning with Christ for endless years in the bliss that only heavens can harbor. This is a kind of pious article of belief that Christians are encouraged and in fact mandated to develop and entertain. So, if you abandon your faith in life after death, then you cease to be a Christian. So much importance is attached to endorsing this article of faith. And this becomes part of the confession of faith that Christians are made to make every Sunday as part of the Sunday service in churches. So, a believer is required not only to believe that there is life after death, but also required to pretend that he or she is very keen and eager and just can't wait to enter into that bliss. And in fact, there was a time when it was very customary for Christians to hold late night vigils to expedite the second coming of Jesus, because when Jesus comes a second time, the present scheme of things will melt away and a new order of life will be inaugurated by Jesus. As per biblical suggestions or biblical nuances, Jesus would establish a reign of 1,000 years, and all those who have been faithful to him will participate in that reign of bliss upon this earth itself before the scene shifts to a different situation altogether. So, theoretically, Christians are supposed to ardently look forward to that prospect, anticipate eagerly, impatiently, if you like, the second coming of Jesus, so that the present spell of life can be terminated and believers can enter an entirely new order of life with Jesus as the center of it. And as part of that, there is also this belief that there is life after death, and those who lead a life of righteousness are entitled to an eternity of happy, blissful life in paradise, in heaven, wherever that heaven is located. I have to say right at the outset that all these concepts are completely enfolded in obscurity. There's absolutely no clear teaching about any of these things. Ironically, the most coveted goal in religion is also the most vague, uncertain, and indeterminate. And I've always found this to be a problem, because as a human being, I know that it's impossible to attach your heart and focus your faith on that which is completely vague, that which is enfolded in obscurity. It is very essential that an optimum level of understanding is available regarding anything to which you are required to attach your sincere, honest, and deep commitment. But here is an exception to that, in the sense that Christians know nothing about what awaits them in terms of the circumstances and quality of life after death. The whole thing is completely vague, uncertain, and yet they are required to be in a state of complete eagerness and absolute passion towards attaining that state, life beyond death. This is one part of the story. Let me state that part again. There is life after death. That life after death is infinitely more preferable to life before death. Therefore, whatever privations and suffering you have to endure in this life before death, you must put up with more stoically, patiently, without protesting, without murmuring, without cursing your predicament, because this will be compensated in the world to come, and your suffering on this earth is temporary, fleeting, whereas your bliss in the world to come is forever, is eternal. So this is one conviction or one article of faith that believers, Christians as believers, are required or mandated to entertain. Without endorsing this belief, you cannot be a Christian. At the same time, and this is what amuses me most, at the same time, every Christian I know is also scared of death. Death terrifies every Christian I know. Lay, priest, bishop, makes no difference. Death is the point of transition from this world and the life in the world to come. The life in the world to come is immeasurably preferable to the life here, and yet that point of transition from this undesirable life on planet Earth to the most desirable life in heaven, life of eternity, life of unblemished happiness and fulfillment, life of perfection, if you like. That point of transition is the most dreaded concept or experience that all believers can even think of. Now, I have always felt this to be a very, very terrible contradiction. Somehow these things are never taken into account while Christians examine themselves. My argument here is not that there is no life beyond death and the life beyond death is not desirable. That's not my point at all. I am only noting a factual state of affairs, which to me is completely contradictory. Now, having noted this, let's proceed to the next step. Why is it that believers who apparently entertain a world of promises given to them by Jesus, in whom they trust absolutely? Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions for you. If it were not, I would have told you. I assure you that there is." So, there is this assurance of the world to come, And Jesus only reveals this much, that there are many mansions and you will be entitled to one of them, or maybe at least a room in one of those mansions. At any rate, you will not suffer any want. Now, the reason why Christians think of death with unmanning terror. You will never come across a Christian, no matter how strong in his faith he is, how ardent his attachment to Jesus Christ is, who does not, at least secretly in his heart, experience the terror of death. Outwardly, for public consumption, he might say that, oh no, I am completely delivered from the terror of death, because Jesus has destroyed the terror of death on the cross of Calvary. After all, doesn't Paul the Apostle say, "O death, where is your victory? O hell, where is your sting?" So insofar as Jesus has conquered death on the cross, death holds no terror for me. But that's a theoretical position. The experiential situation is completely different. And therefore, Christians who pretend that they are completely above the terror of death are not honest with themselves. That's one of the reasons why I say that when it comes to professing your faith in the public domain, the first casualty is truth. You will never be free to acknowledge or confess the truth when you make a public stand of your life of faith or your articles of belief. Now, one of the reasons why people think of death, and therefore also life after death, in spite of the fact that they say to the contrary, is this problem of ignorance. Now, let us examine for a minute the psychology of ignorance. Now, there are two possibilities as far as human experiences are concerned. One is pleasure and the other is pain. You think of that which you know in terms of pleasure, provided those experiences were pleasurable. But you can't think of a single experience that you do not know, about which you think of with delight or pleasure. In order to understand this, let's take a very commonplace experience. Suppose you are traveling to a new country about which you do not have the foggiest idea. You do not know the language, you do not know any person living there, you do not know the layout of the country, you do not know what awaits you there, and you really don't have the resources to manage your affairs there. But like in a nightmare, you are going there. What is your experience? That country may be a wonderful country for what you know, but actually you do not know. The only emotion that will be active in your mind whenever you contemplate the prospect of going there will not be pleasure, it will only be pain, it will be fear, it will be anxiety. And this is a simple practical truth. You contemplate on this for a moment and you realize that that is indeed the case. I've had occasions to travel to many countries, and the first time I visited a country, and in spite of the fact that I knew there would be people at the other end of the journey waiting to receive me and to take good care of me, I always experienced a considerable amount of anxiety. It was never a pleasant prospect for me to travel to a new country. Maybe there is something wrong with me, but that's how it is. That's how it has been with me for many, many years. But the second time you go there, the third time you go there is different. I am talking about the first time you visit a country about which you know very little. You can mitigate this danger or this problem by reading up a lot before you go, and in some cases I bothered to do that. Therefore, the degree of fear I experienced was mitigated to that extent. So, we must understand why believers experience, whether they confess it or not, immense anxiety, fear and pain at the prospect of facing death and through death entering the world to come, or life after death. That's why Christians, like anybody else, would cling on to this life, even if they have to live in an acute care center or a critical care center intensive care unit, ICU, for 5 months, 6 months, somehow cling on to life to the last possible day. At the same time, they are completely enamored of the life beyond death, but they don't want to die. Now, this contradiction is something that we have to understand. So, the first reason why this contradiction happens is that irrespective of whatever scriptures we have, never mind which religion you practice, all of us have to be honest enough to admit and realize that our ideas about what happens after death, our information about the conditions of life that we might encounter in the supposed life after death are completely unknown to us. And the contingency of having to relate to that which is completely uncertain can only breed fear, pain, not pleasure, certainly not, if you're honest with ourselves. There's a second reason why Christians feel completely out of their depths when they think of life after death. And I've dealt with this issue, but not exactly in the light in which I'm dealing with at the moment. I talked about the many instances of people above the age of 65 experiencing suddenly an aggravated sense of anxiety about what awaits them in the life after death. They believe that there is life after death, but what will it be like? Complete anxiety. In fact, I've seen people shaking with fear at the thought of what happens to them after death. Now, there is a reason for it. The reason is, even when they say that they believe in the life after death or the world to come, they're actually not sure about it, for the reason that, and this is important for us to know, and it's important for me to state it truthfully, that in nothing that relates to our life upon planet Earth, there is any reference in truth, pretenses, professions apart, in reality, in truth, there is no point of contact between whatever our life is like on planet Earth and whatever is in that world to come. There's a complete disconnection. Now, you can think of God, you can think of the world to come, you can think of heaven, all that you can do, but it only remains some kind of abstract idea, for the reason that while you are living on planet Earth, you did not care, you did not bother to draw from those resources. I am someone who believes that such resources exist. And it is possible for human beings to incorporate those resources, this extra natural or supernatural resources, even as we live in the natural world. For example, in the Hindu tradition, there are certain highly accomplished yogis, spiritually developed persons, who can draw energy from the sun. I have not seen any person doing it, but I've heard this reported to me by people who actually looked very convinced about it. There are yogis who can draw energy directly from the sun, just like the trees using sunlight for photosynthesis to manufacture their nutrients. So, you and I can't do it because we have not developed the skill or the technology, if you like, the methodology for doing it, whereas these specialized yogis have developed that skill, and therefore they don't have to eat food the normal way. Whenever they feel that they need energy, all they have to do is to go and stand out in the sun, maybe for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. Then they are recharged, like batteries being recharged from time to time. They are recharged and they are ready for the rest of their work. But as far as vast majority of believers are concerned, they have no connection with this world beyond nature. Our life on planet Earth is lived entirely according to the resources and strategies, the provisions of this world. And therefore, we are actually cheating ourselves, fooling our conscience when we say that we believe in the world to come, because we have never tried to connect ourselves. I am not saying that that world doesn't exist. I am only saying that for all practical purposes it doesn't exist to a vast majority of believers because they never bother to draw a particle or resource or energy or support or guidance from that source. The life of every person, irrespective of religious difference, is the same, absolutely same in this, that life is lived not according to certain religious notions and spiritual resources. Life is lived entirely upon material resources, cultural preference and passions, and worldly goals. We profess different religions because we simply happen to be born into these religions, but our religions really don't make any difference whatsoever, either in the kind of persons that we are, or in the quality of life that we lead, or the goals that we live for. And yet we quarrel most ferociously about and on account of our religions, which is one of the most ironic things we can think of. So given all this, given the fact that even though we say we are very keen and desperately eager to get into the life after death, the truth about us is that we are mortally afraid of death, which also means that we are most reluctant to proceed from this life to the next. And largely because of our ignorance, we know nothing about what awaits us after death. As Shakespeare says in one of his plays, I think it's Hamlet, where he says, that untraveled country from whose bournes no traveler ever returns. That untraveled country from whose bournes means limits, boundaries, bourns, bournes, no traveler ever returns. In other words, the world, life after death is a country. You can go there, but you can never return. Though in Greek mythology, Greco-Roman mythology, there are instances of people returning, and in the Kerala Onam legend, there is the idea of Maveli, the ideal king, being permitted to return to visit his subjects once a year, and that occasions Onam festival, etc. In Greek and Roman mythology, there is the story of Persephone, who is allowed to return, and her return marks the advent of the spring season. These are all seasonal etiological myths. Anyway, so apart from that, no traveler ever comes back, and therefore there is really no authentic information on what the state of life will be after death, and yet we are required to believe in it. And belief in that which is completely uncertain can only anchor us in anxiety, fear, and helplessness. And that's not a particularly happy state. Well, you can mitigate that helplessness, that fear, etc. by intensifying your faith, which means that you actually brainwash yourself. But if you were to go about it in the normal manner, you actually take the opposite path, namely, as you approach the end of your life, as you enter into old age, and you suffer your physical deterioration more and more, your anxieties will intensify all the more, and a time will come when you have to confess it to somebody else. Till then you will somehow hold it back, but the time comes you cannot but open up and share it with somebody. And that's what's happening to a large number of people who are in touch with me, and I appreciate their sentiments. I pray that they may have the peace of God richly indwelling in them. But the reality of the anxiety that live each day, the anxiety that they live each day is something before which I bend my knees, because these are of profound existential realities, and it is completely unacceptable to make light of it. I'm reminded of a very moving scene in Dostoevsky's famous novel Brothers Karamazov, in which that most celebrated ascetic monk, Father Zojima, suddenly rises from his seat and goes and kneels before Ivan, one of the three brothers, the Karamazov brothers. And Ivan is a materialist. Ivan has absolutely no pretensions to any religious interest or spiritual merit, and yet this man of great spiritual evolution, famous throughout Russia, suddenly rises from seat and in front of everyone goes and kneels before Ivan and he starts crying. And much later, Alyosha, the younger brother, finds out why Father Tsushima knelt before his brother, whom Alyosha considered to be too worldly, too materialistic a person to have a soul inside of him. So Alyosha understands why Father Tsushima did this most mysterious thing to his brother, his elder brother. Father Tsushima was kneeling not before Ivan, but Father Tsushima intuited the prodigious suffering that Ivan was about to enter into, and he was kneeling before and weeping at the insufferable, unmanning, unthinkable suffering that Ivan would be entering into. So he was actually folding his hands before the suffering of humanity. That's the profundity of that situation. Anyway, so I thought it would be worthwhile to consider some of these aspects that people usually dodge, because talking the truth about these things would be considered highly impious, and I definitely incur the risk of being labeled anti-Christian, unbeliever, and as I am these days sometimes called son of Satan, so on and so forth. All this is fine, I have no problem. I am what I am by the grace of God, and therefore these appellations, names, and implications do not upset me. So I'm not saying that this is the last word about the topic. It's a very complex, challenging, and daunting theme. Therefore, as things become clearer and clearer as days and months roll by, I may make more and more supplementary videos on the topic, and therefore I would also request my viewers to keep a tab on these connected videos, so that the progression of thought spread over a period of time can be mapped. On that I close, and I wish all of you a very meaningful day ahead. Thank you.